And good morning, everyone, to Gateways 21. This is a tutorial session. We will start with the first tutorial, which is an overview of the Apache Airavata software stack for science gateways. Our presenter is Suresh Marru. Welcome, Suresh. Go ahead.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Rob, for organizing this tutorial. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in. This is a good turnaround and turnout. And again, if you joined in late, so I'm not sure how Zoom does, for example, just picking on a couple of things. Dimuthu or Raisin, do you see the chat window with the Google Doc link? If you click chat, do you see the Google Doc link, Dimuthu?
No.
Okay, yeah. So those who joined, please bear us as new folks hop in. We'll try to send the chat again, so with the same Google Doc link, so that others don't miss it. So we will use this document as our guide today as we walk through. So I'll get started here, and please feel free to interrupt. Again, as I requested, please introduce yourself in the Google document. Given it's a 90-minute tutorial, we will not have enough time to go around the room. So what we will do is, we will please put in your comments and interrupt us though if you have any questions, or we have a little bit of a loaded content here today. So do not hesitate to interrupt though. But as you put in your any particular interest you are willing to get away from the tutorial, we'll try to see if we can adapt and address those as much as possible. Okay, good morning again, everyone. Today we are going to see an overview of the Apache Airavata ecosystems. I'm Suresh Marru from the Cyber Infrastructure Integration Research Center from the Pervasive Technology Institute, and myself and a few of my colleagues will together present this today. So again, I'm not sure how much detailed agenda you had access to from the tutorial agenda, but if you see the Google Doc, you have the agenda, the abstract we submitted, so the link there, and you will see that we put in a few different components in there, a few different big pieces by themselves, we don't tend how we will cover them, and it's a challenge to cover all of it and do a lots of hands-on. So we'll try to balance it with, we'll do a little bit of a hands-on and some presentations and some demos. So we will mix it, but do not hesitate again, to interrupt us anytime if you have a question or if you'd like to learn more details, and we'll be happy to go into details. So we'll start with that overview. What is Apache Airavata, the entire stack, and we'll do a small hands-on exercise of running a computational experiment on the Exceed cluster. If you're not familiar with Exceed, it's a national computing environment in US. It starts from extreme science and engineering discovery environment. So it pulls together a bunch of resources at various institutions. So we are going to use some of those clusters and submit a computational job and visualize the results. So moving from there, we will look into once you have your computations, how you would use data services and how all the if you've been attending Airavata tutorials in the past, we have some of the updates to this tutorial, particularly on the data direction, and we had an independent, slightly independent project, a standalone project called Custos Security Services. We've been doing some tutorials, standalone tutorials of those as well. So we will get a feel for some hands-on using how to use Custos Security Services. And that could be in conjunction with the rest of the Airavata services, or you can use them independently. And then finally, we'll recap on all the modules we've looked at. So let me start by putting the definition out there again, just for the perspective here. So science gateways, when we say, as we are all in the Gateways conference, so science gateways has various definitions, but look it up on the Science Gateways website too, and on the Wikipedia. So, in a nutshell, the science gateways translate the cyber infrastructure elements, which include storage, compute, instruments, various people's expertise, and applications, and translate that into providing science certificates. And as you can imagine, that's a big challenge. Like, how do we do that? Like, how do we combine these complex pieces of infrastructure and provide a very simplistic view so that users can get science done? And the ability to do that, like, happens through various software stacks, which we will review today. And in the end, they all shape up to be user-friendly science interfaces. Like, so how do we do that? Like, in our case, we are fortunate to work with a great team here, which is like, brings in a very diverse expertise here. Like, those of you who have joined the call early heard Rob Quick saying, like, how he brings in lots of data expertise and, like, for example, high throughput computing expertise and so on. Similarly, like Eric Coulter on the call brings in a lot of infrastructure expertise. Sudhakar on the team, like, brings in lots of science expertise. So I'll not introduce the entire team today in the interest of time, but we are a group of folks, like, all with different expertise, but with a common goal. How can we make science more, like, help accelerate more science outcomes? Like, how can we integrate with various cyber infrastructure elements and build software stacks and services, and then provide the necessary consulting to use this infrastructure to deliver to the scientific community at large. So, as I was repeating this, like, the cyber infrastructure has various elements to it and various aspects to it. And Airavata, over the time, Airavata is a project. I'll encourage you to briefly follow the document. Again, I'll briefly pause and share the document. Like, if in case you do not have the link and you joined in late, please alert us. So this is the document, the Google Doc we will use, which will have all the links. And we're starting with introductions from the folks. If you joined in, please put in your name and any particular interest you have. Document. Again, we have the links to the Airavata tutorial, like the tutorial abstract, and the websites of the Airavata project and some sub-projects we'll be talking through. So one of the things, like aspect, we will not have time to go into detail, but I will encourage you to visit this page called Apache Way. So Airavata and the ecosystem we are going to talk today are very much governed by all these rules, like what you will see on this website, which is, in a nutshell, community over code. It talks about how community can play a role in large open source projects. Like, Apache is a home to lots of modern big data and machine learning based projects, from going all the way back to the Apache web server. So, so where the community, like all of you guys who are willing to be users for this tutorial today, and potentially will have more interest, long-term interest on this project. So you're all as first-class citizens as the developers of the project and have an equal say. And there are various ways and what that means, what it means in practice, how to make decisions and how move forward is all described here. So all the components many of the components we are going to talk today are covered by these governing principles by the Apache Way. We'll be happy to share our experiences being in Apache if you have an interest there. So going back to our topic today, like, we will look into the entire stack of the cyber infrastructure, what Airavata can enable. So we'll start from the bottom. So briefly we'll touch upon, we'll not have a hands-on portion, we'll briefly describe how we can, like, provision elastic virtual cluster for container infrastructure on cloud like infrastructure. Like, if you are familiar with the Jetstream cloud at Indiana University and Texas Advanced Computing Center, it's an OpenStack based virtual cloud. So in addition to, of course, like, gateways using the OpenStack based APIs or spinning up VMs, like, you can essentially create a personalized cluster to do your own computing. So we'll start, like, if we start with the virtual cluster, it's there is a little bit of a technical diagram, but in a nutshell, what I wanted to convey here is, so the way the virtual cluster works is, like, you can spin up a head node, which stays up all the time and takes up a small amount of resources. And as needed, as your user community needs, you can build up, like, compute images and spawn them as you go. So using this mechanism, so you can essentially, like, use the benefits of what the cloud brings and the on-demand infrastructure with the familiar or the HPC modes of operations and deploying the HPC friendly applications and so on. Of course, you can take advantage of the containerizations and aspects like that. So we'll be happy to go through some of these details. But let me pause here. Anyone has any questions or interest in the virtual clusters topic? Any curiosity on what you'd like to know more here? We'll put this into the perspective as you do hands-on. This will start making sense. So if it is not enough information yet, yeah, that's totally okay. Please bear with us. Again, we have quite a few presenters in the team, the entire SERC team here. So feel free to put your questions and the discussion items as well in the Google Doc. Please, we highly encourage the next 75 minutes to be very interactive as much as possible. So we don't want to do monologue here. We'd like to understand what you are and what you are interested in, and then tell you as much as possible, deliver to that. So the virtual cluster, again, as I said, it pulls together and builds essentially the necessary infrastructure, whether it's data or compute kind of infrastructure you can think of, like predominantly compute in this case, on to do the necessary computation. On top of it, the Airavata stack, you will see built upon an Apache Helix, a distributed system framework to do various distributed system tasks. Based on that, Apache Airavata enables execution services. We'll start in the next 2 to 3 minutes. We will start a hands-on session where we will experience some of this. And once we see those executions and the data produced in our computations, we will discuss how those kind of data can be made available to the larger community and what the Apache, the Airavata's data services can do. So whether moving data, cataloging the data and helping discover those data sets and so on. And as we can imagine, all of this, doing this execution, integrating with these resources and various data sets requires a very fine-grained, detailed security infrastructure. So that's a project by itself, within the Airavata ecosystem called Custos. The Custos security services, integrating with the CI logon, enable various in common, edugain, and all federated, majority federated academic and research organizations and some social services to be accessed to authenticated. And the Custos integrates, in addition to the CI logon's authentication, uses HashiCorp Vault to manage computational secrets and how you can enforce various data level authorization decisions using the sharing services. So we'll see doing a small hands-on. We'll see how, when you do a hands-on on the execution services, you are inherently using the security aspects. When you are watching the demos on how we will do various data services, you are seeing security in action. In addition, we'll have a small hands-on. You can see how you can use Custos for outside of the classic science gateway context, and how you can develop a learning management system. We just called it Canvas, like the popular Canvas thing, how you can develop your own Canvas and how you can implement various authentication, authorization decisions using Custos. And finally, the core of science gateways, like developing science-centric interfaces. So we will see that over the course of the tutorial today, this morning, you will see how Airavata provides an out-of-the-box user interfaces ready to be used without any development needed, and with some configuration on how you can configure resources and applications and enable your community to write out of the box, use some of these interfaces and put your resources into a science-centric view. In addition, what the Airavata's Django framework allows you to, in detail, extend those and develop various aspects. For example, how we would use the Django framework to develop a data-centric gateway will be some things we'll be looking into today, and how you could use maybe make smaller extensions as maybe customize the look and feel, or maybe add in a custom input and output viewer, or do a little bit of a semester-long development and then develop a totally differently looking gateway with a different interaction. So that's the full spectrum. We'll start from the resources and getting to how do we develop these science-centric interfaces. Again, please watch the Google Doc for links to our previous tutorials. From the other members from the team have done this, a half-day tutorial to some like the virtual clusters. If anyone, please add the virtual cluster tutorial links there as well. So there are recorded virtual cluster tutorials for a full-day tutorial on how do you use containers and on Jetstream, and how do you integrate that with Gateway as well. So we have tutorials from half a day to full day, ranging from virtual clusters to how do you customize interfaces. So please refer to those for very detailed dive down. But today we'll get a bird's eye view, trying to cover, especially if you're looking at this for the first time, to give you an overview. And we are available to go in detail, like offline, or point you to the right tutorial to dig through. So let me pause here. Any questions, comments, and quickly check the Google Doc. If anyone has posted any comments. Again, feel free to speak up, please. We don't mind interruptions as we go. Okay, thank you for that acknowledgement, Maxwell. Okay, we'll keep going here and get to the hands-on. So I'll just put one more thought before we start the hands-on. So I was describing these various stacks. So what is that why do you need all of this, the full stack cyber infrastructure? What do you what is that we've been doing? So if you had a computer science faculty, if you're a computer science faculty and had a grad student, probably you figured out, or even in a domain science, if you have a grad student, you can build a quick web server or a gateway to do job submission. So why do you need this larger systems and with a larger community, and with it has a contributions of a good amount over this course of its lifetime, with quite a big number. And you can look that up on the GitHubs, in the links provided in the Google Doc. So what it can do? So what we've ended up developing this ecosystem in a very modular way, so that they can couple together to do end-to-end science interactions, as well as can be used in parts, so that you can bring in any number of resources, bring in your own type of storage, whether it's your on-campus resources like storages or cloud resources, and how you would bring in your storages and integrate with an infrastructure. How would you bring in diverse compute resources, and we will go through some demos today. Like the UltraScan gateway, through the UltraScan gateway, we deploy one of the 50 science gateways we support, uses resources across 5 different countries. And as you can imagine, they come with various policies, various network latencies, and how we deploy that, and how the Airavata framework enables all of this is kind of a part of the hands-on exercise. We will see that, but and if you have interest, we'll be happy to go look under the hood and provide a preview there with the compute. And similarly, we'll see some examples on how do you add application, or how do you convert it. If you have a scientific application, how you quickly bring in and deploy a gateway and convert your scientific application into a service. So if you have, if you're a faculty or a researcher who has a scientific code, you would like to quickly deploy a service, we can look into that. And or if you're supporting a researcher who has that need, we can demonstrate how Airavata can help you with that. And all of this, of course, goes with the repetition, the risk of repeating. We need to be doing it in a secure, controlled way and enabling larger collaborations. We will look into that in the Custos hands-on portions of it. So that's the kind of the big picture. We'll now start diving in. So the big picture is bring in your own codes or infrastructure, cyber infrastructure elements, and turn them into different gateways. And these gateways are very tailored for a community of targeted community. And we will see how you could, what you could do with an out-of-the-box gateway and how you could extend this. Yeah, we'll start answering the questions. Yeah, thanks, Bala, for that. So the question is, the SciGap has a custom authentication mechanism like CI logon? Yes, in fact, we will see that in a minute now. So if that your question is not answered after our hands-on, please put that back again. So we'll do a small hands-on activity on touching upon one of the major pieces of the Airavata, which is the execution. How do you do the execution pieces? So let's, in this small hands-on exercise, we will log in to a test instance, essentially, and this is what you will get out of the box, out of Airavata when you deploy and you configure. So it didn't have any code customizations like where you take it, but it has configurations done. So when we taken out of the Airavata, check out an Airavata Django portal and deploy it, what you will see is what you will do a hands test drive with today. So we will log into the test drive, upload a pre-constructed application input, and watch the job getting submitted to a supercomputer, monitor, and visualize results. Again, the point of the exercise is, again, it's kind of the hello world scenario, but to get across what you can do with the Airavata infrastructure. So feel free to get your thoughts and questions coming on what this means, how can you bring in your application, or how can you add your resources. If you have any such questions, any question is a good question, so please ask us. So again, going back, so we'll do this hands-on. So Eroma sent that link already on the chat, so please you use that link, but start looking also into the documentation. Again, we skip for the hands-on the virtual cluster, but if you have an interest in how to deploy your own virtual cluster, you're welcome to look at this instruction. But as with everything we'll talk today, we'll point to the software and documentation, but of course, we make all of those available as well. There is a way you can work with us and help getting this. If those instructions look complicated for you, we'll be happy to work with you. So we'll skip the virtual cluster. We are now doing the second piece. So please click on the link and the documentation link, the second one of the custom Airavata tutorial link, and you will see this pop up right here. So please go to testdrive.airavata.org. It's a test instance of the portal. So you will log in. So you'll be taken to this home page. Please log in. And now let's go back to Bala's question. Well, again, please speak up. This is not what you were expecting. So when you can use two modes here, a local account, but we'll highly encourage you to use an institutional one, because if you use a local account, your email needs to be validated and you need to build that in. So please use an institutional identity. So here, the Airavata, using its customs framework, integrates with all the InCommon and EduGain institutions. So essentially, you will see most of the worldwide academic institutions come here. Please search for institution. So it pre-selected because I used it before, Indiana University for me. Please choose your institution and then click log on. So, but let me pause here. Bala, does that answer your question? Feel free to speak up, please.
Yes, Suresh. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you're interested on how you integrate just this piece or authentication, that will be part of the hands-on, the customs one. We'll talk about it. Yeah. So once you log in, if you select your institution, it takes you to your institutional login. Or if you happen to have not see your institution there, please select Google or GitHub or ORCID ID and log in. If you do not have any of your list you can work with, please pick up. We'll help you to do the local authentication. So once you log in, you might not see the same screen, but I'll wait for everyone to make sure they can log in and come to a dashboard like this with a grade application. These are all various scientific applications. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyone having issues authenticating or getting to this dashboard? Eroma, I'm guessing you are watching the loggings to make sure if you're going.
I am Suresh, and if anyone created and still didn't get access, just let me know. I'm enabling everybody as they come.
Okay, so I'll keep proceeding here. But again, if you get too far behind, please interrupt us. So what we're going to do is, you'll see a bunch of applications, and we can briefly discuss how these applications come into the first place. But let's first get a job going. So let's take follow this tutorial again, please. So once you log in with your institution, you'll see that we are going to submit an application job for Gaussian 16 using the Gaussian computational chemistry model. And to run this experiment, you would need an input file. So please download this one. So again, don't know how to get to this document. Please follow again, just to recap, use the Google Doc, click the second link, And in the custom tutorial, you will see that you will find a link to the input file for the pentane-diol molecule. So please click that and it will download it to your local laptop. And we'll see how to use that in a minute. So and now we are launching an experiment to do a Gaussian computation. So of course you can give it a name, your name. So I can pick a name and you can organize that. Like, we'll come to a very detailed view when we talk about in the data services part. But you can organize this experiment by projects. By default, you'll see a project created for you. And you can create other projects and organize this. And you give a name, and you drag drop in the input file which you downloaded. So you can please would suggest, like, for now, please pick the and pentane-diol one. We'll be happy to provide you a link in our other tutorials with other input files, so you can try other applications as well. So when you get the input file, you can look at it. Again, Pamidighantam who is on the call, who manages these applications on various infrastructure, can provide detailed insights into how to construct this input file. But for now, with my naive chemistry knowledge, the way I understand is, in the Gaussian requires specification of the resources also in the input file so that the model can appropriately parallelize functionally. So it takes the number of processors and memory requirement, and then a name for the log files on the molecule name, and the location and spin and the coordinate. And from there on, all the atoms in the molecule, their locations and their orientations and so on. So you can edit this, also and save it back. If you're a chemist and if you are familiar with how to construct a molecular input file, feel free to edit this. I'm not, so I'm not going to try to attempt that. So I'm going to take this stock input file, inspect it, and I'm going to submit this for now on the Expand supercomputer at the San Diego Supercomputing Center. John, so Eroma will give you an access. Thanks, John, for trying. Remember, John Cobb is waiting for the access.
Can you maybe refresh?
So John said, like, he used a GitHub authentication. So maybe
so I've already given the added him. He just needs to.
Can you please refresh, John, and see how it goes? And speak up if you still don't have it. Okay. Yep. Thank you for trying. So I'll launch this job and we'll come back. So hopefully John can catch up quickly. So once we select the resource here, so the resource is pre-made. So, and we can look into the configurations and then change the node count, but I would encourage you to keep those for now, because as you saw, that the Gaussian requires also to match those the configurations in the input file. So we'll leave the 8 core count and launch this job. So now we'll go and go into the as an admin mode. So those of you who have access, you should be able to do this with me. So if you click on the workspace here on the top right corner and click settings, and you will see an administrative view of this application. So for example, let's quickly inspect how that Gaussian application was developed. So an administrator provides a brief input and descriptions. And in this case, it was a simple input file. So just said okay, upload an input file, which is a type of URI, and says this is the read-only, this is the description to display to the user. So now we are look at this interface as an administrator. How would you make these applications visible in the first place? And then you describe what outputs you would get. In this case, there's the interesting parts are in the .log files, and how you can have a specific output viewer. In this case, there's a Gaussian eigenvalue viewer. We'll talk about some of those, and then also are interested in getting the checkpoint files back, in addition to, of course, the standard out and standard error. So once this is constructed, once the interface is made, now this is what the users will see. And as an administrator, now you would also need to point out to where all this application is deployed. So for example, this is an example virtual cluster I was talking about earlier, like on Jetstream. Virtual cluster is spin up and it says like, what kind of default node counts and so on this like application. But I'll go back to this deployment and say that the one we are going to use. So we're going to see how the Gaussian applications, like it's pointing to a binary on the remote machine in this case, and some specific flags which the application requires to be overridden for the application and the modules to be loaded. So essentially, you can think of like, we translate back a batch submission system on how a resource works, and then like, encode all of that into the deployment information. But we are not describing what kind of parallelism and how the machine will be using, how the entire rest of the information that's described elsewhere within the infrastructure. So we'll quickly go back and look into the experiment statistics here and get a little more detailed view here. So we see at least, okay, John, looks like you've managed to get in and then submit a job. So we'll look into John's experiment here. So I'm now looking as an administrator. As an administrator, we have the view of every user's experiments. Like, and if a user is logging in, they cannot get this view. They can only see the experiment they launch. All of this is enabled to the security infrastructure. So here, what we'll see here is the job is seeing the overall job state being active. And then this is the Slurm script the Airavata system has constructed based on the user's input and based on some pre-configuration. Administrators have configured how to work with expand system and what kind of scheduler it has, what kind of parallelism it has, and all those kind of details. And Airavata will look into these interesting things. Airavata injects a couple of messages so that as the job runs, as the job starts, as the job finishes, it can get in near real time status notifications. Of course, when these fall back, like, it can fall back to the emails which the scheduler will send to a pre-configured one. In addition to, of course, in this case, looks like John also click the send me an email button. So the scheduler will directly send an email. And in addition to the system watching this. So each of these steps, as we see, are broken down. We submitted a simple job in the back. The Airavata broke it down into multiple steps. So we'll view this in a minute, but any questions so far or anyone having trouble getting to this point, writing a job? And you can see if you use the scheme to the settings UI, you can go back to the workspace and click on this experiment tab here on the second one on your left, and then see what you're running and how it is going. Again, I'm looking at it as an administrator, so I'm seeing everything here, but again, I can go back and click, and as the job is done, it's active. As soon as it's done, we'll come back and look at some of the output files. Any questions? Any comments? Yes, Chris. So the question is, I think, like, how do you get an exceed allocation? Yeah, you have to go out of the band to get an exceed allocation. Obviously, you have to work on the exceed portal. Either you can get, through a startup allocation to quickly get up and going, or like apply for a research allocation. But what the gateway allows is, so as I was trying to point out in the introductory slide, the gateway goes with a mode of bring your own allocation model. So in this case, the test drive has an allocation system, it's kind of, we are pointing in the expand system. So if you see here, so the expands use the allocation. So it's putting in the SDSC's allocation number here. So, so when the job is being submitted, it's getting charged to this account. And then I'll quickly go back and show that in the job script. So in the job script, when you look at it, yeah, thanks for trying the clone as well. So in the job script, you'll see that gets added as a batch macro, so that the infrastructure knows which allocation to charge to. But if your question is on how to get the allocation itself, Rob Swift's on the call. We can probably speak up from the exceed side. Oh, Chris, we cannot hear you. Sorry. Oh, your mic is. You're muted, but we can't hear you for some reason.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with you with the next seat allocation. If you have questions, please feel free to send me something directly. I'll put my email in the chat right now.
Thanks, Rob. So Chris, sorry, we can hear you, but like we couldn't hear you, but just email Rob directly, or for any question, just email Circ, the email you see is circ@iu.edu, and we'll route it to the right person who can get you. But yeah, so once you have your next seed allocation or other allocations from your respective infrastructures, we'll be happy to help you plug this in. Okay, Bala, your question is, I tried Gaussian and Autodoc and tried to use existing stored input file, but could not find them. So maybe you do not have the right permissions. Eroma, would you like to answer that?
Bala, the stored input files is a personal space. Like you need to add your files or upload your files. You wouldn't get access to a generic sort of a repository.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought they are supplied example files. Okay, so
no, since individual users is sort of different, and the applications they use, unless you upload yours and keep it there, it wouldn't be.
okay. So for the tutorial, do you have any example files somewhere I can copy them?
Yeah, let me point you to that.
Actually, yeah. So I'll point you since I'm sharing here. So Vala, if you click on the PERC tutorial and other links, you will see the entire suite of applications. But in the current instructions, you're seeing the NPent IR. But we'll send you a link. Maybe Eroma, you can directly send it on the chat, a link where you can download a dozen different scientific inputs for sample inputs for a dozen different scientific applications. You can try it out.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. So we'll keep moving here to get to the other portions. So I'll go back to my slide. So what we have done in this simple hands-on, or what we are trying to get a feel for, is how, as an end user, we did try to do two things. As an end user, we submitted a job, but quickly looking under the hood. So what happened under the hood is the Airavata system, when the user constructed an input file, it took these various pieces and constructed a graph of various tasks. And those graphs of tasks, and those tasks include quickly setting up an environmental working directory in HPC environment, or it could be other environmental set of tasks, for instance, in a cloud infrastructure provisioning resources. And then you stage your input files, you submit the job, you monitor the job, and or get the output. The output is done. So that's what when you go to this administrative view, you've seen these various small components. Again, the users generally what you've seen as a user in the dashboard is this top level, the most left hand view here. You created an experiment, it gets validated with the inputs and the resources, it gets scheduled, it's launched, and it's executing. And that executing is a big long step, and you will see if completed and the output results. But what happens under the administrator can see is it's getting broken down into each of these subtasks of preparing inputs, submitting the job, what does the job script look like, how is the monitoring happening, and each of these steps done. So this helps administrator to isolate problems, where when things break down and so on. So that's the kind of the view. And so that's from an administrator's point of view. But if you're really looking from Airavata, from a distributed system point of view, breaking this in this kind of a modular way and breaking this graph helped Airavata really support lots of different interfaces. As I was quoting one example, like the Ultrascan Science Gateway, how we need to use various resources. In an aggregate, Airavata uses 75 different resources across 5 or 6 different countries. So, and each with these policies. And that's this kind of modular way of breaking these into smaller tasks helps us write those into a manageable fashion, have the code in a small way, and chain them and monitor them and apply all the modern cloud native principles, how do you keep them fault tolerant, how do you retry them, how do you have a short lived, the tasks are so small so that you could retry, and then you make sure that they are not repetitive, and so on. So there is a lot of under the hood details skipping. But the key takeaway, from this exercise here is bring in your real. So what Airavata, what you see in this part is You bring in your science like goal, whatever you are trying to do here, right? You have an application, you're trying to make a service, you're trying to make a data, you want to make a service, which we'll look into some of these, but basically bring your science goals and bring your what you want to do for your community and bring your own resources. We are providing resources to host and operate this. We'll talk about that. But the computational resources is something you bring in. Like for example, if it's Exceed, you bring in your allocation. You're obviously not bringing your resources, but you're bringing in your allocation. Maybe AWS the same way. But like if you have campus clusters, you can help you integrate those infrastructure or other infrastructure you have access to. So you combine them and then get a gateway. And of course, you can spend a lot of time installing and configuring this, but on the other easier ways, you need to convince Eroma, which has been answering some questions, to give you a production gateway on this production infrastructure in a highly available mode. It takes about 2 hours of our time to get to very similar to the test drive what you have seen and used. To go from 0 to test drive takes Eroma 2 hours, but of course you need to find a way to convince her. If you are interested, we can talk about what that means really. And we can also find out what that available time means. But I'll pause here. Any questions on this part? So we are looking at the execution services and how you can deploy essentially what you have seen out of the box from Airavata. Okay, I'll keep moving here, but please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to interrupt. So let's quickly have a segue to build up from this, what you have seen on the execution side into the data stack. So we'll quickly show a couple of demos and come back. So first, let's take this very small step, from what we have seen in executing this application, and now how, let's say, a small step will be. Okay, we need to look into the output file. In this case, if we go back to the output here, for the example, the demo I launched. So once it's done, it should be, it's complete by now. So if I go back to my dashboard as a user, I can go back to my list of experiments here and click on the Gaussian job I've submitted. And once the output came, we can click on each of this, the log file, for example, and downloads, and can plug in with different viewers. We'll look into that. But you can get access to the files. But in addition, the Airavata data services provide a custom parser. So for example, it takes a little bit of a scripting, or in this case, the Gaussian Sudhakar found out there is a CClib, a common chemistry library, which can parse out a lot of chemistry application codes and extract out key value pairs. So you can get those key value pairs, and we can get the contents of those files. So far the metadata, what we've looked at is what the user has submitted, which resources they've used, what inputs they have used. But now we can start diving into some of the insights of those data sets themselves. For example, from the input files, all of these are extracted from that log file. So if you open the log file on your machine, you will see that. Please share that. Find my text. Okay, so this is the log file. So again, please don't bother reading it. It's too small font. But what I want to show you is you can use a parser to get into the contents of this log file, and now push that into a database, which you can do some searches here. So for example, this is the individual computation for viewers, and it can construct the Inchi strings from it, and then in this case this was some demo example. If Sudhakar is showing this, he has some nice good big molecules, which then automatically visualization is done, and you can do some searches. For example, you can do some simple thing which molecular formula I used across all my experiments, and then do a search. And once I get all of those results, you can export them into CSV and do some analysis. So it can present them. So that was a simple example, but this is where we are going into Airavata stack, going from execution to now extracting the data and helping organize those data sets. And again, this goes without saying, it's applying the right security policies across the board so that only I can see my experiment or the ones I have access to. So in how you give access to someone, you can go back and see you can share this. I can share this experiment and then say, so John, I can give this access to John so that now he can look at it. I trust John, so I'll give him right access. So that now he could modify this or change my projects and so on. So this kind of the security aspects we'll come back to. But now John can use this and clone this experiment which he has access to and further modify it or look at it in his data searches. So similarly, we will go back to a little bit elaborate examples. The Gaussian one is where you started out with apply a parser and bring in any computational input, parse it, and then do that. And from there, let's look at an example of how you will build a data-first gateway with a little bit complicated computational output. So in this Gaussian output, we've seen one log file. So the example I'm going to show you here is it's using a AI-driven decision-making support system on combining the water, energy, and land resources, and so that each of these communities in this water community, energy, and land communities can make their decisions on natural resources. So what InteractWell can help is essentially researchers or farmers or whatever the county administrator visualize the results of a computation in a very user-friendly way. So, and in a nutshell, we will have access to the slides from the Google Doc as well. So it can help your diverse communities make data-driven decisions. Again, we'll be happy to point to a YouTube video of a recent Exceed ECSS symposium where the PIs describe these projects in detail if you are interested. But for now, we'll keep it the focus on Airavata and look into how Airavata enabled this gateway. So in a very simplistic way, so it starts with you'll need a portal. You'll need a portal to deploy the InteractWell. So we'll go into, so this is the same Django portal now we are looking into as what the test drive, what we have seen. But now, as you will see, it's not out of the box the same as what you get. It will take some customization. So you can start with customizing it and changing the basic look and feels using, and each of those, how to customize and what you do are all available from this. The documentation you can see in this part, you can look into the wagtail, how you would use that's a CMS system the Django portal uses on how to customize that. But once you customize the look and feel, there is more in this gateway. So we'll see the similar authentication system powered by CA Logon. I use my institutional ID to log in. And now I'm trying to say, again, these are different interfaces based on the user who is logging in. As I was putting it in the InteractWell, it includes decision makers, researchers, and the community, larger community like the farmers and everyone who are interested. So based on their expertise, the system looks at their role and provides them, in this case, I want to provide get a new plan. So if I want to get a new plan, I'll start with loading up the data sets and then click on the region. In this case, I use the default. I'm not going to describe a lot of science and the underlying goals, what this gateway is doing, and speaking it from an Airavata standpoint. So what we are seeing here is all of this is developed as a custom Django app and added to this. So now all of these inputs are custom made, but it's eventually going to access the computation. Just like the Gaussian we have run before, the PI and their delegates have run the SWOT models and stored that into a database. Just like the Gaussian output, simple example we are looking, the data is stored in a database, and through an API, a custom Django app now is pulling up this information so that I can get into detailed plans. Again, I wanted to show you that you cannot look at these details you'll not have access to all of this information, but you can look into go into the InteractWell website and get a feel for it. we'd be happy to provide a little more detail. If you are interested, let's say I really would like to develop an interactable like gateway, you can talk to the PI to get access to it or to a development instance. But just wanted to give you a feel how you develop these custom data services so that you can visualize the data for your different communities in a different way. Again, any questions? Like slowly we are doing a segue from the execution services. Now we are looking into how you would use the data services alone. And in this, you can see this, it's providing the data services to different communities. They do not necessarily do a computation by default. It's not, I have a model input, I provide it, I get an output. So now we have gone to providing to a community which care about their goals, their decision making. They do not necessarily need to have the expertise to run computational models, but they are benefiting from the outputs of those models here. Any questions? I know we are like, given the 90 minutes, we are going to cover a lot of it. So there's a lot to observe. So hopefully the recording might help too, but feel free to interrupt too as we go. So I'll keep going, but again, we'll be waiting for your questions. So we're slowly moving from like, how we can take a computation, like, take the data out of a computation, and how do you provide that, parse those outputs and put that into a database and make it available. A little bit more elaborate example on how do you would use this data to a completely data-driven gateway. And then I would encourage, like, if you go to the serp.iu.edu, and there's a link to it, again, point to the link. So in one of the links here, early on, like, you'll have a Serp website. So we'll encourage you to click that link, and then again, our website is outdated. So please don't judge us by that, as with every website which is outdated. So you'll eventually travel to this website link where you will see some of these collaborations. So you can look at this interactable website. Similarly, there are other gateways, like, we'll be happy to show you and how detailedly these data infrastructure are developed. So the visualization. So Marcus, please feel free to jump in. So in this case, like, the visualizations are like, the data is coming from an API, and the Django is including the Vue.js based JavaScript function to visualize. So the maps are based on Leaflet JavaScript, Leaflet.js, and each of those charts and are custom Vue.js JavaScript functions, and parts and some use jQuery. Marcus, anything you'd like to add on the visualization part and how we can visualize the data? Oh, sorry, I didn't realize Marcus Christie was not online. Yeah, so so in short, like, we can essentially, what Airavata data infrastructure can enable is, can give the JSON files and expose the right REST APIs in a secure way, providing the right authentication and authorization. And from there on, you can just Google a JavaScript library, and this is done by essentially one of the detail, like, the visualization and interact well are done by a UI person who was just learning JavaScript. So it's not hard, like, you can use essentially what you'd find online on how can you have the basic plots, basic charts, and then you'll use the APIs and integrate with them. So, so can I add any of these applications? So again, like, here we are, like, the way to look at Airavata is the following way. So Airavata is bringing in the computations, like access to and the data, in a secure way. And what you develop in your user interface is up to you on how you would develop your user interface. But if your question is, can I use remote visualization? Like, can I use, like, any, like, which requires VNC access? That's a different question. But if you're asking how do you develop various WIS services, the way it works is, so you would, like, each of these, the execution services, the data services are exposed through APIs, and you would consume those APIs, and you would write your respective Java visualization user interface and add that and deploy that into an interface. So instead of developing standalone, you would just focus on the Viz aspect and then leverage the rest of it from the framework and deploy that extension, what you develop for that Viz app, and deploy into this. So Marcus Christie, if he's on the call, he can more authoritatively answer this. But from what I heard from Marcus, essentially you can bring in any Viz app and run any app like you would develop into using other JavaScript frameworks. So we use Vue.js a lot. You can bring in and wrap it around in a Django app and add that Django app into this framework. If your question is more about remote space, please speak up.
Yeah, Suresh, yeah, that's great. So I was thinking, like, you have, for example, NAMD, right? That comes with VMD, Visual Molecular Dynamics. And then if you run Gaussian, there are a couple of applications to look at the final results. And then I saw that somewhere you mentioned about Jupyter notebooks, and certainly RStudio is there. So if I want to integrate any one of these with the existing gateway, I just want to get a feel like, how easy or hard it is to do that.
This is a detailed tutorial, so I'll let you look at it and be a judge of it, like how easy or tricky it is. But like as an example, here is a direct gateway out of Cornell University, and where once you have the outputs, like you can plug in a visualization. So the detailed instructions for this, like if you go back to the tutorial documentation, which you use to submit a job and get the molecule, right below there, you will see create a custom output file. So it takes like a little bit of, again, first like to get a basic understanding of Python and how to wrap it in a Django app. But after that, what goes inside, how you would work within it is you take Lambda, like the other lamps input output viewers and all, you can plug it in. It'll take some effort, but you could start by looking at this example, how you would take an existing UI and then wrap it into a Django app and then deploy it. Once you've done that, like, for example, if there is, I'll also add this link to the GitHub. We did not add this before. So you can look into github.scigap and look at search for like something like app, and you'll see a whole bunch of examples, like, how we add these apps with some of the projects. Each of these probably give you an idea on how to do those. And there is some little bit of a organization you need to follow, some basic guidelines, but from there on, it's pretty straightforward. We work with folks who quickly developed an R-Shiny app or an R to how to translate that and so on. So we'll be happy to work with you or provide you the right pointers on how to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Suresh. Yeah, I'll take a look at the examples and get back to the team. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for those questions. So yeah, again, I was planning to cover this towards the end, but we'll be happy to walk through. So there are these extensions come in various ways. Like the first one is like you get out of the box gateway, you configure your own resources or application. Then you can go by skinning the gateway. Then like some of these questions, you can customize how the inputs are provided. For example, there is a tutorial. With the tutorial test drive access you have, please feel free to follow this tutorial offline. These are the detailed steps here, how you would customize an input. In this case, it first talks about how you would provide basic radio buttons, check boxes, and so on. That's the basic input. And from there on, it can also provide you some additions, like you can add a MIME type to do some validation and add some components. And this goes on, and then finally it can point you to an extensive input viewers and output viewers, like the way input and output viewers, like the direct gateway and a few others I'll point you quickly. And then there's also the wholesale new app you can develop, like the interactable example. That's the adding the custom Django app example here. So each of this is decently documented, and we've been doing tutorials on some of this. So feel free to check out the prior tutorials, the video archives of them, and follow these instructions. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to email us after the fact. And So one examples, and so you can also get a feel by looking at this. Like for example, if you go to this example Mega Gateway, and you can look into how and look into the manual here, you'll see some examples on how how the code is done, and then it will point down to the gateway manual on how you can customize this, how you can do this. Is an example for where you have custom inputs, and pulling it from an external database and using those, for example, the big sequence libraries and so on. So I'll keep moving here, but again, but these are very good questions. So do not hesitate to interrupt us. So going from this, the Wiz example, so we'll look into one more data aspects. Let's say here I'm looking into a data gateway developed for the Electron Microscopy Center, an instrument facility at Indiana University, where you have various resources, where the users go in, conduct their experiments, get their outputs. So I can look into, for example, look like a Google Drive-like capability here, but what happening really powerful here is this data is pulled in from the instrument in a very detailedly, in a secure way, from moving from one location to another. And the parser which we are looking, just like the Gaussian parser, there are various parsers to these image files coming from the microscope. And then those parsers are extracting metadata out of those image files using out of the box, image parsers and so on, getting details what kind of settings were used on the instrument, what modes were used. And so the basic metadata, whatever the images the instrument has saved into the files and into the header, the system can extract and now make all of this searchable. So that was the idea. And there's also a fact that if you can download this file, so these instrument facilities can be very big. So the way when I click this download, the file is not located on the web server. The file is somewhere on the remote storage device. There, the data infrastructure, I'll briefly go to an architecture in a minute, but it's it uses a component called managed file transfer. Again, each of these are very very detailed concepts. So please look into this paper. So if you look into this, for example, I'll click this one paper. So if you are interested in, I would like to understand about this managed file transfer. How is that download happening from an instrument gateway? So we'll encourage to look into this. So instead of data coming directly from a web server, it took us an effort. How do we manage and provide these portals to large data sets? So it uses a proxy. It's an agent. It runs next to the storage. So when we do the handshake, it checks the security, returns a data URL, and then sends it back to a storage, which again authenticates and verifies the user came with the right token, and now downloads it directly from the storage device. So this way, we can essentially provide portal access to instruments which from the storage is only limited by the capacity of the storages provided by this instrument, not by the bandwidth from the web services or and the file systems on the web servers and so on. So directly getting from the storage. So this kind of I'm glancing over this topic, but wanted to point out the additional resources. You can get details, and yeah, let me quickly go down to this architecture diagram and walk and show. Let me change my share to the diagram. So what happened in that instrument gateway, when I looked into got the data set. So so from the instrument, an electron microscopy data was observed by a user. It gets to a central storage device, and then the Airavata's MFT component, the paper I was pointing to, it moves data from all of these places, moves from a centralized storage to a long-term tape archive to the computer servers, where the user has access to, or user can configure their access to these days. Many campuses have access to Azure or Google or AWS clouds through their campuses or through their directly paying for it. So you can move those data sets to these cloud infrastructures, and now the user can download it or do some computations like the way they did with Gaussian computations. That's an example, but let's say your computation requires an instrument, an input file from one of those instrument facilities, you can directly pull in and use that. So that's the backend architecture. Again, we are not looking into under the hood, but just wanted to give a glimpse of each of those. Please check out those papers and the code repositories to understand each of these details. So in this case, like, this kind of totally independent, decoupled from the execution infrastructure, you will be able to use the data infrastructure independently. Take these pieces and plug in your own storages, write your own data parsers, and extract and record those metadata sets, and then do a search and discovery of those data sets. So again, I was just trying to walk through those 3 examples of the secret data catalog, the interact well, and the electron microscopy gateway to give an overview, like brief preview of this data stack. But the key takeaway here is you can use this data stack, just like you got out of the box the test drive. You can use this data stack and bundle it with the test drive like gateways and write parsers, or you can take this independently to build data gateways like the electron microscopy gateway, and they come bundled and integrated with the custodial security, which we'll look next in detail. And it also bundles with the managed file transfer component, which I was trying to say, so that it can move data from point A to point B and make storages accessible where you might not have the HTTP protocol. For example, your storage resource might have an SCP only access. How would you make those data sets available and downloadable from a web client? Will make it, you'll require the protocol translation and doing all those buffer management, and that's done by the Airavata managed file transfer services. So in our stack, we've been looking into the virtual cluster, the execution one, and the data one. So we'll look into security next, but let me pause here. Any questions? Okay, I'll take this in now. But again, do not hesitate to email us after the fact if anything occurs to you. So please click this link. So now we'll look into, we mentioned this few times now on how all of the Airavata infrastructure comes bundled with custodial security. So we've already seen you experience the custodial security when you did the simple hands-on of an execution. And you were looking at that when I was trying to show the electron microscopy data. So this is a data set I got shared with. I didn't have access. I can, of course, further share with other users, but I can get access to it, as a very detailed way. I can be the manager of those data collections. I can have editor privileges so that I can modify some metadata or add some notes here, what this collection is and so on, or I can get a view access. So all of this security in this data infrastructure and the data lake architecture I was briefly showing is enabled by Custos. So, but just to get a feel for what Custos is and how, Custos project, again, I'll encourage you to look into these tutorials. Here we have the POC tutorials where you'll get a feel for how Custos is used by the Galaxy, primarily for the gene sequencing community, but the bioinformatics community at large. So Galaxy is widely used as science gateway. How Galaxy is using Custos to provide federated authentication, or how the HathiTrust Research Center is using Custos to provide a controlled access, the federated authentication, controlled access to their the consoles of how do you do that, your digital humanities research on them. So similarly, again, that's a very detailed tutorial about the Custos capabilities, how you can use the APIs. But we put together a simple tutorial to get a feel for Custos capability outside this kind of a science context, just to get so that it appeals to everyone and you can make sense out of it. So those who are taking classes or who taught or teaching classes kind of are familiar with Canvas or similar learning management systems, where you will need to do these authorizations where in a controlled way, the university registration office or the provost's office need to give access to a professor first to a course. So the course gets bootstrapped. And now once the faculty then can assign various teaching assistants who have access to view the assignments and student submissions and then and potentially grade them. And the students who cannot see other students' submissions and cannot grade their own assignments, but can view and submit those assignments. So how the custos can be used to do this simple scenario, a general purpose, to get it outside the context for a while, is this tutorial. Again, I'll walk through. I may not have feel free to walk with me, but I will not stop in the interest of time. But the link is there, so I would say please go and log in to the custos portals here. Sorry, I'll send a link. Feel free to log in just like the way you use CA log on and logged in. So I'll send it on this chat here. Log into this test drive. So I'm skipping the portion where, if you follow the PERC 2020 tutorial, you'll see that it explains, as an example, if you are an administrator, if you have an interest in deploying a gateway or a gateway-like application, you would come to this custos management portal, and then you request tenants. So you would request tenants, and we would authorize one. I requested a gateway tenant, and when you requested gateway tenant, you will see in this tutorial a very detailed instructions on how you would create an admin account and provide other meta information about the tenants. But I'll use a pre-configured. I created a tenant earlier this week. So I use this pre-created tenant and put that, and now I'm pretending that custos give me a tenant similar to what Galaxy has, or the Airavata gateways we have seen, or the Hathi Trust Research Center. I have a distress tenant, then I will use and develop this. I took the custos meta information on client ID, client secret, and so on, and pre-configured this like a Docker container and deployed this small portal. So we'll see that I can again use the CLOgon like infrastructure and use my institutional identity and log in. And what I'll see is now I'm viewing like a faculty view. Again, if you log in, please let us know. Please raise your hand on the chat, or let us know if you're logged in, and we will add you to this access. So for example, I will go to the user. Okay, Bala, you logged in. Thank you. So I'll now make Bala a student. So I'll save this. And now Bala should be able to log in, and then if you refresh your page, once my permission is done, if you refresh your page, I'll go back and also add you to the group. So I'll talk about those two things, why I'm doing these two things. So I added you. So now to the student group. So the first one, I gave you a role. So I gave you a role. I clicked on this user, I gave you a role so that the system, this simple application, check the roles, various roles to present with different interface decisions. Like a professor role will have to create assignments. A TA role will have a grading view. Students will only have. So you can make those kind of UI level decisions, which UI page to load to which role when you give a role. And then I've added you to the group where you get a fine-grained control of each of these. For example, I can create a new one, gateways demo assignment, and then I can I'll just quickly get going, and then I'll give a due date for Bala to submit by end of day today, and create an assignment here. And in the assignment, I can you will see that the sharing permission, I can share this assignment. By default, it's shared with students as a viewer, and the teaching TAs to edit them. So I can modify those, or I can give those individual permissions like each of these. So I can give this, and now Bala, if you refresh your screen again, you should see this assignment and like a way to quickly submit one. And if you submit one, I'll see that Eroma, Dimuthu, and others are not doing their job and not submitting their assignments. They'll not get a grade here. So once they submit, then you'll see all of them, and I can look at this and authorize this. So the point here, trying to get across here is how you can use custos, first of all, to provide an authentication. So how do you use custos out of the box to do a simple application where you can enable local accounts or plug in with CI logon, and then leverage all this institutional identity and develop that authentication system. And then from there on, how you would use various OAuth flows provided by custos through roles here. You will see that there are various roles, that's the standard OAuth terminology. How you would develop an application using this OAuth handshake and develop various UIs and give them the appropriate authorization on which role has which access. And then you can have various data sets, or like in this case, grading assignments. In the electron microscopy center case, I was trying to show collections and data files. In interactable cases, I was trying to show different screens or different viz interfaces to different users. All of those are done very similarly, just like this example. So there are various groups created, and those each groups are assigned or attached to a particular entity. That entity could be anything, in this case, an assignment, or it could be a data file, or it could be a website, or a particular the Wiz post-processing output, and they could be applied based on the gateway needs to do this fine-grained authorization. So there's a lot of detail on how this is happening. Again, I'll encourage, if you are interested in that security topic, to read about the custos paper. So there's a link to the custos paper. So there is a link to also to each of these detail, like the code, the source code of the custos services and some various client repositories. And you'll see how you can use some of these SDKs and try one using a Jupyter notebook. So you can try out actually how would you develop an application in this simple and do authenticate and so on. But how do you would program against these custos, and how do you would do like the way we are seeing in this canvas example, how you would get various user information, how you would get groups, how you would add users to the groups, and so on. So let me go back to the slides here. So the key thing, what we are looking, the few things, I skipped over the API parts. I'll come back and answer if you have a question. But in a nutshell, you can use custos out of the box to do the authentication of various authorization decisions, and then sharing and of various documents or artifacts. And one thing we didn't look into detail is you can delegate various secrets. Like I have an access to my AWS account, and now you can think about going to that electron microscopy portal and say, okay, here is my AWS credential. Now the system knows how to access your AWS. You delegated your security access to AWS. And now you can copy those instrument data files to AWS storage, or Google, and so on. So how would you do this is what the custos piece is. So you can, the key takeaways are, you can write your own. Of course, custos comes bundled with the rest of the Airavata pieces if you're using them. But if you have an interest in using them separately, just like the Galaxy or the HathiTrust Research Center, you could use those. You can create a tenant and take the credentials and develop an app. And it can, this security is so flexible, the way the group-based and role-based access, you can apply it. You can apply it to any piece. For example, we didn't get a time to look into some educational gateways, a symbascular gateway, cardiovascular, a science gateway out of Stanford University, brings in their own storages and applies the custos security to which user gets access. If there's a class taught at Purdue, they can only use a certain storage, or if they can use only a certain amount of resources. If they are doing research using some vascular gateway, they could use a little bit more amount of, they can submit, for example, higher number of course jobs. So you could imagine applying those security all the way from resource access to data to web pages and so on. So the way it does is you can see that from the custos, it's integrate lots of widely developed and used security services, including CLOgon, Keycloak, and HashiCorp Vault. Each of them, if you look into the Keycloak and Vault GitHub repos, you will see that there are hundreds of developers actively working on them. So developing and integrating a security service, we want to be working with a larger community there. So that's the kind of the custos overview. And the Django one, we've already looked into it, and I was trying to summarize that by the documentation. So you can take the Django, the gateway out of the box and deploy a test drive-like gateway. and it can bundle with the rest of the middleware to do various computations and so on. You can customize it to get your own look and feel, or you can write your own Django apps like 20 or 30 or examples. You can look from the Circ website, from SimCCS to Future Water to the Interact Well, and all these examples and how they write Django apps. It's a semester-long effort. You can think of like roughly from a grad student, or a few weeks of a full-time developer. You can write an app and customize it fully. So you can go anywhere from taking it out of the box in 2 hours, configuring it and getting it up and going and deploy your science application as a service, to doing this extensive modification, providing your own data science gateway or instrument science gateway and so on. So I'll stop here, but we covered quite a few here, aspects. There's a lot of, we looked into the data platform, which is kind of very new into the Airavata ecosystem, but we're starting to use it more and more in various projects to manage transfers, to orchestrate data pipelines, to provide in general a data lake so that you can deposit various data sets and provide controlled access to it, or portal frameworks where we just spoke, like you can take out of the box or develop those apps. All the execution platform where you can integrate various computational resources and add extension point. Like we had a student from Nebraska, Lincoln, adding an extension to Open Science Grid and Condor. And we had previously collaborators from Germany adding extensions to Unicore. So how that kind of a framework allows a general framework to add your extensions on various execution mechanisms and deploy and benefit the high availability and robust nature of it. And the customers, of course, which we've seen in detail, on how you would manage users, groups, resources, and sharing. So I know that's a lot to cover across all of this, across the spectrum. But feel free to ask us any questions or after the fact, or to speak up now. We'll be around for a while. With that, thank you for your attention. And please let us know your thoughts, comments, questions on anything you heard so far.
Thank you, Suresh. Let's see if the audience, they have any question. We have a few minutes left.
Suresh, question about customers. So for the service to work, does it have to be outside the campus VPN? Any thoughts on that?
So are you talking about the resource itself, the computational resource?
Yeah, computational resource. If I try to run the service, so does it have to be outside the campus VPN, right?
So yeah, that's a good question actually. So we get that a lot. So the current way, what we've seen, what you will see out of the box and what you've seen today is to whitelist. So we go from a fixed known IP addresses hosted between IU, the enterprise infrastructure, and Jetstream Research Cloud. So a couple of IP addresses will provide, you'll need to whitelist that to get to that resource today. So we'll do that, and we can audit and we can record all those things. So in a controlled way, you can allow us to whitelist, and that's one way we can work with, and that's the way we work with today. But the MFT component, which I was trying to show briefly on how you would move data from a storage device, the way that worked is we deployed an agent, a managed file transfer agent, right next to the storage device, and now it enabled that storage resource to be accessible by various protocols. So we plan to extend that same agent concept so that you will deploy an agent within your VPN infrastructure, so that the Airavata will send a control signals, and then you would just work within your security domain. The data never leaves your campus. That's the future. With the current way, you would need to whitelist your the resources behind VPN for Airavata services to be able to work with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions? We might have time for one more question or two.
Yeah, again, please keep that bookmark the Google Doc, which has all the links. So we might edit for further edits, like just so that we don't attract spam, but like we'll keep the document with your permission. And anytime, do not hesitate to contact us by that email if you have any further question or something that occurs to you later.
Okay, thank you, Suresh, again. And with this, we conclude this tutorial. And next, we will have a break, and we will start back with tutorials at 1 o'clock. Have a nice day and enjoy the conference. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luis. Thank you, everyone, for attending.